Expedition 33, the hot new JRPG coming out of France.
Yes. Hi, Tam.
Hello, Lucy.
We're here in Tokyo to play Expedition 33. That is the footage you are looking at right now. It is a game that is simultaneously so French and so Japanese at the same time. French inspired by the characters. If you've seen some of the trailers, you'll see a Eiffel Tower in distress. They'll swear in French.
Yeah.
Putain de merde.
Some catastrophe has befallen the world, but also it is so inspired by Japanese games.
Yeah, a lot of JRPGs. I mean, we spoke to them back at Gamescom, I believe it was, and they said one of the major inspirations was Sekiro. And at the time we were like, now that we've played it, they weren't kidding. So they describe it as a turn-based reactive action battle system, which is a very apt description of it. But in my mind, it's basically if you have Final Fantasy VIII as a reference point, and Final Fantasy VIII is a huge influence on them. Imagine the gunblade attack where you slice and then hit the button to add an extra kind of gunshot to it. Imagine that extrapolated out and then put on pretty much every aspect of a turn-based mechanic.
I'm going to say something really controversial, and I'm going to say it's especially controversial because you are here and you are a huge FromSoft fan. Landing a counter in Expedition 33, I think is more satisfying than landing a parry in a riposte in a FromSoft game. There is something about the way the game kind of it slows down, the vibration in the controller, the slow-mo, and then the kind of crack as you return, as you do basically your counterattack and you deal a significant amount of damage. As a turn-based game, I think I have brain rot and I need to be engaged at all points. Like, I'll find myself playing turn-based games and kind of my brain will switch off a little bit and I'm just kind of going through the motions. And I played the demo again here in Tokyo and I felt like I could see through the matrix. And there were points where I was playing and I was landing parries. I was parrying, I was countering, I was dodging perfectly and getting AP points. And so I was then thinking ahead, using my party, because they obviously each have their own abilities, pretty extensive skill trees that you can spec into. But particularly when you get the character of Mael, who is stance-based, and her stance changes, and you can it reverts sometimes, and you can sort of. I was like building up. I was using Gustav and Lune to basically build up to a stage where Mael would just destroy them all. And I want to say that, like, as a turn-based game, I don't think I've ever played a more engaging turn-based game. And so when you say reactive, it is bloody reactive.
Yeah, and it is reactive, and by reactive we mean pretty much every action you take has some sort of additional input or requires additional input from you, other than the basic attack. Any sort of magic spell, you're going to have to do a quick QTE, and usually if you fail it, you do some damage, but you're missing out on extra bonus damage. And then when it's the enemy's turn, like you said, you got a parry, you can dodge, which is like a jump back, and that has a normal dodge and a perfect dodge timing. And then there's also a jump attack, which is just like Sekiro, where like you'll see a symbol appear, you jump in the air and you hit a trigger to kind of react and attack back. But the stuff that you're talking about, again, they talked about FromSoft being a pretty big inspiration, but the thing that you talked about is effectively the equivalent of playing through one of their games, experiencing it from the first time, which is what we did last week, and being kind of like careful, and it doesn't look pretty when you play through a first From Software game. Like, my first playthrough of Sekiro was a mess, obviously, but then when you go back to it and you are familiar with the mechanics, you know how it all works,
You have the
confidence, it feels like a different game, which is what you talked about, where you felt like you could see from it. I had that same thing where bosses that I was struggling with before, when I played it again now, I was like hitting the timing on them perfectly. And the way you said, like, oh, it's, more satisfying than Sekiro, I don't necessarily agree. However, I do understand why someone would think that. And I think the actual feeling that it gives you, I would liken it more to like a rhythm game, like a DDR or something like that, when your music track hits a certain, like, the circle perfectly, and you hit the button on it, and like everything like it celebrates the fact that you did it. This game does the same thing with counters and stuff like that, where there's a perfect timing, you hit it, and the sound, the animation, and the kind of feedback is so good that it feels amazing to hit those counters.
There were points where you and I were sat next to each other playing the demo on our own PCs, and there'd be points where I would do, I'd defeat a run of enemies without taking any damage, landing counters, perfect dodges, the whole shebang, and you were doing the same thing or beating a boss that you'd been having trouble with previously, and then we kind of look at each other to be like, did you see that? Did you see that? And I think it's so satisfying.
The other thing that makes it satisfying, and I think it's also a momentum-based battle system in the same way that Persona is with the baton passes, where people who have played Persona will know that you start off with one move, but if you hit the right move, you can then pass it on to the other character, and before you know it, you've wiped out 4 enemies in like a few button presses, and it feels great. They don't have that same system where it's like you can go from one character to the other. They actually use the turn-based system that's from Final Fantasy X, another major inspiration, where it lays out the kind of path for who's going to attack next, but you can use the abilities to kind of set up stuff for the next character. So for Gustav, for me, I use Mark a lot, which is he'll do this like thunder shot from his gun, and then it will paint the enemy, it will do damage and paint the enemy with a red X, and the next attack that hits will do 50% more damage. So then I would do that, and then the next attack I would use would be a elemental attack that exploits a weakness, so it's already powerful, but then we'll do double powerful. And then like Mael would come in, and I would use like her ability, which puts her in an offensive stance, which allows her to do even more damage the next time around. So it has that momentum based planning and strategy that is very, 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 very satisfying.
And not just in that, in the kind of moment to moment of a battle, you have this system, Pictos, where you have these abilities. You can pick them up in the environment, and as kind of collectibles, and then what you can do is you can assign them, and once they've been used a few times in battle,
there's like a familiarity, so where you level them up almost.
Yes, and then once that happens, other characters in your party can get their bonuses as passive. So I was getting some where, if I defeated an enemy, I'd be granted a certain number of ability points, or if my health fell beneath 50%, I would automatically be shielded. And so there's this other layer that I was thinking of, especially once my roster was the 3
characters.
I was like, well, okay, Gustav goes first, so if I quickly level up this Pictos through him, and then I can give the buff and the passive to Mael. And so there's another layer of the strategy, and it's really interesting.
It's an interesting system that I will also say, like, having played the demo multiple times, I'm still not 100% certain how it completely works. But I think that is not a negative, it's a positive thing, because there's like, what I was doing was picking up Pictos, giving them to one character, letting that character use it enough to get the ability without the Pictos, and then putting that Pictos on another character so they could all learn each ability. So that was like my approach to doing it. But there's like buffs that you can pass on and that kind of stuff, and it's a very interesting system. And then on top of that, there's an actual skill tree where you put in points into different attributes first of all, and then you have ability trees as well, where it's like you want to learn another elemental attack or that kind of stuff. The skill trees aren't super big, like it's not going to be huge, but everything on there will kind of complement what you're trying to do, and there's definitely builds that you can create, and
you can respec.
So you can respec if you need to, but everything kind of flows really well together. Again, this is a very short 3-hour demo that we played, and
there's a lot of optional stuff in there that we didn't even hit.
There's like, it's got a world map. They were huge about the world map. They love the Final Fantasy world map, so they were like, we wanted to bring back a world map, but in like super high fidelity. And it is exactly what they said. It's like the Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9 era of world maps, but it looks a lot like, it has the bloom and the brightness of one of the Octopath Traveler games, and that kind of level of detail. And just like those Final Fantasy games, you could wander into a cave and be like, what the hell is in here? And like it transitions into an actual area that you get to explore. But it's a dense game.
We could talk at length, and we have done already, about the battle system, but I did want to touch on the story and the characters. Obviously it has this stacked cast, and I feel, purely because I've just come off the back of playing, I'm not going to say what it is, you might be able to guess, playing a game where characters were nothing but exposition dumps. Like every conversation would just be, it didn't feel like a real conversation or any means to continue telling a story. Expedition 33 feels very confident in storytelling, very confident in how it is conveying that story to the player. already had these emotional moments, even though the demo we didn't play the opening chapter, but you could still feel that these characters had these deep relationships and you wanted to understand more about them, and it wasn't just, you'd meet a character and they would say, hey, I'm from this place and this is exactly what I do, and there's no real character in there, there's no real person in there. And I was really, and obviously it looks beautiful. It has a very strong art direction, I think, and it's one of those games where it's really utilizing what Unreal 5 can do. And for such a small team, it's about 30 people, it feels really impressive. And so from the 3 hours that I played and that you played, I'm very excited to see, and I just really hope that the whole game has that momentum and keeps it up, because I think it could be something really special.
If I recorded like a Giant Bomb thing this morning about like it was just setting up the day, and I talked about, we played it yesterday, and I said if the 3 hours that we played is indicative of the rest of the game, and it holds up, and the battle system continues to grow, and the story actually comes together, this would be in the running for like my game of the year, just based on the combat system alone. It's like really, really doing it for me. So I'm really hoping it's like shot up in my most anticipated list super high now. So I'm really hoping that this is one of those games that it pays off for, is doing everything that I want it to do, and exciting.
Very exciting. Also, shout out to the music. I know we didn't touch on it in this chat, but the music is also really good.
Yeah.
We'll have more on Expedition 33. Make sure to stay tuned to GameSpot.